Hey again, Beer Fueled family. We are back with another start sit. It is time for week 2. I hope you guys are as excited as I am. I'm going to quick run through guys that I hit on week 1, that I completely missed on week 1, try to explain a little bit of why, what my thinking was, and what ended up happening to counter that narrative, and also why the successes seem to work. And then we're going to jump in and I'm going to give you my start sits for week 2. And I do have some matchups throughout the week here so you guys can have some fun stuff to watch. As always, if you want to follow us on Twitter, we are at BeerFueledFF. Ask any major questions you guys have. Please hit us up there. It's the best place to try to get us to answer any questions for you. Individually, if you prefer asking one of us a question, I'm at Nick Sparts. I'll be on these news shots Wednesdays and Saturdays. Saturdays, I do an in and out segment for injuries. And then behind me, you have Thury BFF. He is going to handle your Tuesday and Thursday episodes. And then lastly, Hop with 2 P's, BFF, handles your Monday and Friday shows. So let's jump on in to guys I hit and missed on my week 1 starts and sits. Starting off with some of the hits. Dalvin Cook versus New Orleans and Jonathan Stewart versus San Francisco both had excellent games. Both teams focused heavily on the run. Dalvin Cook actually set a rookie record with 127 rushing yards, breaking Adrian Peterson, who was playing for the Saints, so that was a little sweet. Jonathan Stewart had a lot of carries. He had 18 total touches. He got a receiving touchdown. He was heavily involved. It looks like they're protecting Cam's shoulder. It's why I'm a big fan of Jonathan Stewart here early in the year. I think his value fades as the season goes on and McCaffrey takes over the number 1 role and Cam starts passing more as that they get more confidence in his shoulder and the ability to throw the ball. But for the early part of the season here, I'm pretty much locking and loading Jonathan Stewart as a starter for probably until the week 4 or 5 once they start really unleashing Cam. Stephon Diggs versus New Orleans was an absolutely massive hit. Finishes as your number 1 wide receiver for the week. I thought I was being a little bold having him at number 9, but Diggs, you looked amazing out there. Scores 2 touchdowns, 93 yards, and he just absolutely burned the Saints a few times. It was a great thing to watch as a Vikings fan. Thank you very much, Diggs. I love you. Coby Fleener versus Minnesota on the flip side. He was the best-looking player on offense for the Saints. Absolutely killed it. 52 yards, touchdown. Had some absolutely massive breakout plays, including one that was almost 20 yards down the seam. It's exactly what you want to see from Fleener. He didn't drop any balls. He didn't make any mistakes. And until Snead comes back, I'm locking Fleener in my starting lineup if I don't have better options. And per my rankings this week, I don't have many better options. It's probably going to be just your kind of standard cast of guys like Delaney Walker, Travis Kelce, so on and so forth. The last big hit I had in terms of my starts was the LA Rams versus Indy, your number 1 defense for the week. I had a just massive game, 2 pick sixes against Scott Tolzien, sacked him a couple times, had another turnover. Overall, the Rams just looked terrible. The Rams look great. The Colts look like they might be the worst team in the NFL until Andrew Luck comes back. So start defenses against them. Cardinals will be a solid start this week. I'm not quite as confident in the Cardinals defense as I was in the Rams just because of the way they're built, but they should still be a very, very good defense overall. So I definitely have them top 10. Some guys I missed. For both sides of the list, quarterback. Quarterback was very strange this week. The narratives did not play out how they thought they were going to. Eli Manning against Dallas, I thought that was going to be a terrible secondary, and I thought he was going to have his way with them with at least 3 targets. Sterling Shepard, Brandon Marshall, and Evan Ingram, I thought all could make some plays happen along with Shane Vereen out of the backfield. Even though Odell was out, I was still confident in that. It ended up being just a complete mess, and Eli Manning gave you 7 points. Carson Palmer didn't do much better in Detroit. He was one of the kind of starts of the week across the board, gave you 9. Things didn't play out how we were expecting. The top scoring quarterbacks were guys like Alex Smith, Sam Bradford, Trevor Siemian. Phillip Rivers and Matt Stafford were really the only 2 guys of note who had good weeks, and they still are not your top-tier quarterbacks. They're generally considered back-end quarterback ones. At running back, Bilal Powell at Buffalo and Amir Abdullah at Arizona. Amir Abdullah had the carries. He just couldn't get it going, and he wasn't as involved in the passing game as I was expecting. I am pulling back on my Amir Abdullah love after watching week 1 because I don't think they have the running chops that I was expecting him to try to accomplish, and they aren't throwing him the ball enough. Theodorek was still involved in the passing game, didn't get any carries. So the narrative I kind of had in my head turned out to be wrong. So I'm going to pull back on Abdullah, and I'm also pulling back on Powell because he doesn't seem to really get the number of touches he needs. He should be more involved. They should be throwing him the ball constantly. He should be the primary running back with Forte being a minor change of pace. Instead, it's a 50-50 where they're mostly just throwing the ball 35, 40 times a game. It's really ugly. There's only one Jets player I'm even at all interested in right now, and it's Jermaine Kearse is a possible he may get enough targets to be worth something type play. Brandon Marshall versus Dallas at wide receiver was a complete miss. I thought with Odell out, he was going to be looking at 10-plus targets. He's still Brandon Marshall. Turns out he's not Brandon Marshall anymore. He did not look like himself. He was not getting open. And the few times he did have a window, Eli missed him. So it's a combination of Eli being bad Eli and Brandon Marshall just not being himself anymore. Brandon Marshall, I'm putting you out to pasture. You're a wide receiver 3 from here on out until I see otherwise. I'd rather start Sterling Shepard in any situation over Brandon Marshall right now. At tight end, Jimmy Graham versus Green Bay. The entire offense for the Seahawks was terrible. Best player was probably either Chris Carson or Doug Baldwin. Doug Baldwin didn't get enough targets, and Paul Richardson looked okay. Jimmy Graham did nothing. He was trying to help block. He barely got targeted at 1 catch, 8 yards. It was really ugly. Try to avoid matchups where that offensive line is going to be exposed. This week against San Francisco, I expect you'll be fine. Jimmy Graham is a start for me. If he produces in any league I have him, I am trying to sell him after this week because I think this might be there might be some really bad weeks in his future, and I think he's going to be really inconsistent where he's going to have to block more than you'd like. Some sits that I hit on. Basically, all my running backs hit for sits. Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman in Chicago. That front 7 for Chicago actually looks really, really good. The secondary still needs some work, so they killed him in the passing game. And that's where Tevin Coleman made a little bit of his hay and kind of saved his day from being a complete dud, but it still wasn't good. And Devontae Freeman bailed himself out with a 3-yard touchdown. Without that, he had 14 touches and about 50 total yards. He would not have saved your day without the touchdown. Cincinnati's backfield was a complete mess. Giovanni Bernard was your best option, and he still wasn't that great. He put up around 10 points in a half-point PPR league. It was mostly off 1 or 2 big catches. Mixon completely destroyed you. And Jeremy Hill, you shouldn't have started anyway, but also had a terrible game. Jeremy Hill had 16% of the snaps. He's droppable in anything but lower than a 16-team league. Mixon, I think, is a few more weeks from his breakout, and Gio is more of a safe play as long as he is healthy. And then lastly, was, as I mentioned, Seattle being terrible, their backfield was terrible. Chris Carson, you started him, you ended up with the best day. He ended up with about 8 points. Lacey got you half a point, and Procise got you a little over 1. So, yay, if you started any of them, you lost. Congratulations. Running backs all around were kind of messy last week, but I was able to at least call out a few of the ones that didn't have breakouts and that you should have avoided. At wide receiver, Devontae Adams against Seattle. He had 42 yards, but he was being projected as a top 18 to 20 type receiver last week. That definitely did not get it done. He was definitely finished more as a wide receiver 4 and not the type of week you're going to want on a guy you're going to start. Randall Cobb looked amazing, too. He got 13 targets. I've switched in my rankings Cobb over Adams for next week, and I think unless something changes in the information we're getting, he will stay there throughout the rest of the season because I think he's going to get more targets than Adams does. Adams may have a little bit higher ceiling because he's going to get more potential for touchdowns, but on a week-to-week consistency basis, Cobb's going to be king between those two. Tyler Eifert versus Baltimore. Cincinnati's offense was terrible. It's one of the worst offensive performances I've ever seen. The 3rd worst quarterback performance since they started tracking QBR for Andy Dalton, and Baltimore's defense absolutely killed them. So if you started Tyler Eifert, you had a really bad day. I hope you listen to me and didn't. I've got him back in the mid-wide receiver or mid-tight end teens this week again. I don't want to start him against Houston, who also has a pretty solid linebacking core and is going to be really getting after Dalton, so Eifert's going to have to block more. If you can avoid it, do not start Eifert again this week. And DST, Seattle versus Green Bay, they were not their usual selves. They didn't have a terrible day. They only gave up 17 points, but it was not as good as you were hoping for, and they definitely were missing some of the love that you normally can get from Seattle's defense. So it wasn't a total bust for you if you started them, but it wasn't as good as you were hoping. Some sits I missed. The aforementioned Phillip Rivers and Matt Stafford, who finished as top 5 quarterbacks. The only 2 somewhat big-name guys who hit. Quarterback was weird last week. I have no narrative to explain it, why things went so weird and why they ended up being as 2 of the top 5 scoring quarterbacks. But you know what? Sometimes you just take your lumps. And the last one I missed on a sit was Tyreek Hill at New England. he flashed way better than I was expecting. They managed to work him in routes and situations where he's going to get the touches he needs to produce. I've reversed track on him completely, and I've got him as a top 20 receiver this upcoming week, and I've got a league where I'm starting him. So he is now firmly locked and loaded for me. If any matchup, that's a plus matchup. It also doesn't hurt that New England's defense looks absolutely atrocious. So I'm looking at trying to start players against their defense here for the next couple weeks. Let's get on to our week 2 starts and sits. Starts, I've got Jameis Winston versus Chicago and Sam Bradford versus Pittsburgh. This is both situations where both defenses have very good run defenses and worse pass defenses. So both teams are going to try to throw against them. Jameis Winston is a top 5 quarterback for me this week, and Sam Bradford is my top streaming quarterback this week. He just put up 350 yards and 3 touchdowns on New Orleans. They have the offensive line where he could possibly do that again here in a shootout type situation if Ben Roethlisberger gets rolling and both teams start scoring points. He may just have to throw the ball out of necessity. Jameis Winston is just the weapons there against Chicago's defense. I think they're more dangerous than Atlanta's offense was last week, and Matt Ryan still put up a top 7 week for you. Jameis Winston, I think, can do the same. Running back, Ty Montgomery at Atlanta. Pass-catching running backs kill Atlanta, as we saw with Tariq Cohen last week. Ty Montgomery can fill that role. He's going to get 80 to 90% of the running back snaps. He is a locked and loaded running back 10 for me this week. Have fun with him. He's going to be a blast. James White at New Orleans. This is me viewing this game as a complete shootout between New Orleans and New England. James White is going to have to catch passes. He will be involved. I think this is more of a James White game than a Mike Gillislee game. I'm putting all my poker chips on James White as a running back too. LaShawn McCoy at Carolina, normally not the type of player I would highlight, except that I've locked him in as my number 1 running back this week. Carlos Hyde actually had a pretty solid week efficiency-wise against Carolina's front 7, and Buffalo is a better running team than San Francisco is. So I think he can feast this week. They're going to have him heavily involved in the game, trying to keep themselves close, trying to keep their defense off the field, and just trying to wear down clock and wear down that Carolina defense. So LaShawn McCoy, I've got you locked and loaded as my number 1 overall running back. The last one, I've got Marshawn Lynch against the Jets. We just saw what McCoy did against them. Marshawn Lynch looked really good against a better front 7 in Tennessee, so I think he's going to be able to do a great job here against the New York Jets. I've got him also as a top 10 running back this week. Wide receivers, Brandon Cooks at New Orleans. We just saw what Diggs and Thielen did. Brandon Cooks is going to feast. This should be amazing. I can't wait to watch Cooks score 2 long touchdowns. I'm probably losing a shot bet strictly off of this week alone, but so what? Cooks, let's see some magic out of you. Larry Fitzgerald at Indy. This is a strictly Indy's defense is terrible. He's the best weapon they've got with David Johnson gone. He's going to get fed. So top 10 for me as well. Start up Larry Fitzgerald if you got him. Last top wide receiver 1 on this list that I've got pegged is Michael Crabtree versus the Jets. Once again, this defense is so terrible, specifically at cornerback. He's going to get at least 1 red zone touchdown this week. I can guarantee that, and 70-plus yards easy. Last one I want to call out is less of a must-start. This is a must-go trade for. If you're in any sort of redraft league where his value is not fully realized, go buy Corey Davis now. He played 41 snaps and he had 10 targets last week for Tennessee, and he looked like a monster when he was on the field. He's going to break out. He's going to break out hard. Go buy Corey Davis as soon as possible, and I would be comfortable starting him as a wide receiver 3 against a solid Jacksonville defense. But I'm putting my stamp after seeing Corey Davis this last week being exactly what I was hoping he was going to be coming out of college. I get him. Go buy him now. For tight end, Zach Ertz is my tight end 3 at Kansas City. This is mostly Zach Ertz is one of the few tight ends who's going to get you 10-plus points strictly off yards and catches. He's not touchdown dependent, and they don't have Eric Berry. He's out for the year with Achilles tendon tear. He's the one who normally covers the tight end for the other team. So they're going to have a hole to fill on defense where they have to figure out how they're going to cover Zach Ertz. And the Eagles have plenty of other receiving weapons for them to worry about where they can't move Marcus Peters or another good cover corner onto Ertz to try to cover that up. So Ertz should feast in the middle of the field. I expect 7 catches and 80 yards for his floor. The other one, Charles Clay at Carolina. I mentioned him as kind of a sleeper going into the previous week as a streamer. Ended up as a top 5 tight end. He seems to be the first read for Tyrod Taylor. So until Zay Jones and Jordan Matthews really take over on the outside, I expect Charles Clay to be the number 1 target outside of McCoy. McCoy still may beat him in terms of targets. But overall, Charles Clay should be a great start this week. I expect him to probably finish around tight end 8 to 10. Defense, Baltimore versus Cleveland. Baltimore showed us a great time last week. If you started him, you got around 25 points. Now they get to go back home and play a Cleveland team, which flashed a little bit against Pittsburgh, but Baltimore's a better defense than the Steelers are. It's going to be at Kaiser has to go on the road for the first time in his career, and he's a rookie quarterback in his second game against a really, really good defense. Things usually don't end up well if you're a rookie quarterback going on the road in Baltimore. And the last start of the week I've got is the Italian Giorgio Tavascio versus the New York Jets. Pretty simple. Oakland's got a really, really good offense. New York Jets have a really, really bad defense, and he came out and nailed every single kick last week, including two that were 52 yards. He looked great. I picked him up in a couple leagues, and I'm happy starting him. He's going to score some points for you. In terms of sits, I've got Kirk Cousins against the LA Rams, Marcus Mariota at Jacksonville. These are both situations where the quarterbacks who didn't look fantastic last week and also are going on the road against good defenses. I don't mind starting them if I don't have better options. So say it's a 14-team league where quarterback's a little threadbare, but I don't really want to have to start either one of these. I can avoid them. I've got them around ranks 10 and 11 overall. Normally these guys would be in my top 8 most weeks. So these are kind of avoid, but they're not complete. Don't complete bench, but try to avoid if possible. Running back, I've got Isaiah Crowell at Baltimore and Frank Gore versus Arizona. Crowell, this is just a better run defense than he faced last week in Pittsburgh, where he averaged 2 yards a carry. He'll probably give you a decent floor because he does catch the ball 3 to 4 times a game and tends to make more hay in those type of plays. And I think Kaiser will be able to stretch the field a little bit better this week than he did the week before, which means Crowell should have a little bit more running room, but still don't love it. He's a mid running back 2 for me instead of generally being a low running back 1. And then Frank Gore versus Arizona is the defense is too terrible in Indianapolis. They're going up against a pretty good defense, and then they also split carries too much. It was almost a straight 30 third between Frank Gore, Marlon Mack, and Robert Turbin, which makes all of them unstartable. Do not start Frank Gore. I've got him as a wide running back 4 this week. Alshon Jeffrey at Kansas City. He's matching up against Marcus Peters. I think Torrey Smith, Zach Ertz, and Al Galore are going to be the better targets this week. Jeffrey's going to have to rely on a touchdown to try to save his day. And Martavis Bryant versus Minnesota. I should have had him as my sit last week. I hated him. I had him lowly ranked. I won a shot bet off of Martavis Bryant, but I didn't put him as my sit of the week. I am putting him here this week. He's going to go up against Trey Waynes, who matches up well against his profile in terms of a deep ball player. So I think they're going to be able to try to contain Martavis Bryant this week. I don't think he'll do quite as bad where he only ends up with 2.4 points in a half-point PPR, but I'm expecting a sub-10-point game out of him. Last 2 for you, Jack Doyle versus Arizona. This is just a situation where the offense is really bad and Arizona is really good against tight ends. Eric Ebron just put up a 2-point game. Jack Doyle's probably looking at 2 to 4 points, so if you can find anybody else, try to avoid Jack Doyle this week. Last sit is Minnesota's Vikings defense at Pittsburgh. Big Ben at home is much better than Big Ben on the road, and he showed Antonio Brown was just a monster last week against what looked to be a pretty solid Browns defense against everybody else. Le'Veon Bell's the type of runner that tends to kill the Minnesota Vikings, unfortunately. So this is a situation where they'll probably get a few sacks. They might generate a turnover or 2, but don't expect the world out of the Vikings this week. This is one of their toughest matchups on the year going on the road to Pittsburgh. I would try to avoid it where possible. So that's all I've got. As always, like and subscribe here at the Beer Fueled Fantasy Football YouTube show. We'll be back tomorrow with another news shot and premature watch list type situations for Deep Leagues Dynasty. And that's with @ThurryBFF behind me. Hop BFF with 2 Ps will be back Friday covering news and DFS. I'll be back Saturday. I'm at Nick Sparts with one last shot of news. And lastly, we'll be going into ins and outs for who's injured and who's going to play and who's too injured to go and who's going to miss and you want to get out of your lineups. Thank you so much for watching. As always, primary Twitter show for the page is @BeerFueledFF. Tweet any questions you got for us there, and we'll catch you guys tomorrow. Later.